passage we're going to discuss is about emotions. It's a psychology-based passage on emotions. Family lore has it that my grandfather, having spent some time doing business in England and about to return to the US, received an invitation to seek additional sales opportunities in Scotland. At the last minute, he cancelled the passage he had booked on the Titanic. If the story is true, then, but for a chance communication from a Scottish businessman, I would never have come into existence. The author says his grandfather was booked to go on the Titanic, but a last minute call about some business kept him back. He cancelled his ticket, he cancelled the passage he had booked, and therefore he was saved. So he says, if it hadn't been for that random business opportunity, I might not have been born. And what led to the businessman learning about my grandfather? Who did that businessman call my grandfather and say, I may give you additional business? Perhaps it was a mere afterthought, as someone was leaving a meeting in the purchasing office of a Glasgow manager. It's just an afterthought, let me call him. There's nothing really planned. So this is the passage starts with a small narration. It's called an anecdote. When you start with a small story, a short incident, it's called an anecdote. So the passage starts with an anecdote, making the point of the author making the point that had that call not happened, had that business offer not come, additional business offer not come, I might not have been born, because my grandfather would have gone on the Titanic. He cancelled his passage on the Titanic. Next. Surely, somewhere along the line, there was something, many things, equally happenstance, without which the invitation to my grandfather would never have been made, without which, that is to say, I would never have been born. So he said, what happened? Somewhere, something is happening. And many things, equally happenstance. Happenstance means coincidence. So things happen by coincidence, but the fact of the matter is that because if they hadn't happened, my grandfather wouldn't have been there, I obviously wouldn't have been born. We are here by luck. Now he's coming to the point. What's the point of this whole story? He says, we are here by luck, not by right or by necessity. Rudimentary biology reveals how extreme the situation is. My existence depends on the birth of a particular organism that could have developed only from a particular sperm and egg, which in turn could have been produced only by the particular organisms that produced them, and so forth. We are here by luck. And then he tells you how human birth itself is a very lucky event. In view of the typical sperm count, there's very little chance of my being born, given the situation that was obtained an hour before I was conceived, let alone a million years before. So human birth is a matter of luck, not of right, not of anything else. If you concentrate hard on the thought that you might never have been born, the distinct possibility of your eternal and complete absence from this world, I believe you too will find that this perfectly clear and straightforward truth produces a positively uncanny sensation. Can you imagine if you sit and think, what if I didn't exist? What if I hadn't been born? He said that realization, that thought will lead to a very uncanny, very weird sensation. You start feeling very strange. That's uncanny means strange. If an uncanny sensation indeed results from such reflections, it's something that just happens. So when that uncanny sensation comes, you may just, he says, shiver or shudder. It can't be evaluated as reasonable. You can't call this sensation, these reflections as reasonable or unreasonable. You can't classify them as reasonable or unreasonable. But emotions can be assessed in that way. You can assess emotions as reasonable or unreasonable. A hope may be misplaced, anger may be an overreaction, fear may be unwarranted. So all these, if you are just afraid of something, and many others may feel that the reason of that fear is not rational, like the phobias. They're not rational. So emotions can be explained or can be classified as reasonable or not, rational or irrational. I want to focus on the emotion of astonishment. So far it is just a preview, just something that, a hook to get you to the main subject. What is that? I want to focus on the emotion of astonishment. I believe that when one reflects on all the things that had happened exactly as they did in fact happen in order for one to be born, astonishment is a reasonable and appropriate emotion. Surprise, astonishment. Oh wow, this is a very reasonable emotion. As with emotions like hope, anger, and fear, the emotion of astonishment can be unreasonable if the associated beliefs or expectations are unjustified or unreasonable. So he talks of emotions and he says emotions can be called reasonable, but even emotions, even astonishment, can be unreasonable if the basis, the associated belief, the belief on which you base this astonishment is unjustified or unreasonable. One can be unreasonably astonished at flunking an exam having taken too high an opinion of one's abilities and readiness. Gives an example of an unreasonable hope or expectation. You think you are too brilliant. If somebody has an over stated view of his own abilities, or has a higher impression, has this exaggerated sense of his own abilities, then he may not study, he could flunk an exam. And so that astonishment, oh, I failed the test, is not reasonable because you overestimated your abilities. Then he gives other examples. Sometimes, of course, astonishment is warranted. Sometimes that astonishment, the surprise that you have, is warranted. Warranted means justified. Consider then what we should say about a young person who is told about the facts of reproduction, or who learns about the chance event that led to her parents' meeting and realized that but for those events, which could be so easily have gone the other way, she would not now and never would exist. So he has again gone back to the topic of birth. He says, consider the situation. What if your parents hadn't met? The whole thing, when you think of it, is just luck that they met, they married, and you were born. So he says, chance events leading to your parents' meeting. When you also realize this, it could have happened easily, things could not have worked out that way. And that astonishment that you feel, he says, is warranted. For such a person, the emotion of deep astonishment at the very fact of her existence is an appropriate reaction. Which of the following emotions would be classified as reasonable according to the definitions given in the passage? So he's given you warranted, reasonable, justified emotions, and those which are not. The basis is the belief on which it is based, right? The belief on which it is based determines if it's justified or not, warranted or not, reasonable or not. Surprised at losing a match in a competitive sport when one has not prepared to face the opponent. Well, not justified, you're not prepared to face, so this astonishment is not reasonable. Hatred for a person who has caused you harm without any provocation. Reasonable. You have not done anything against a person, and that person has caused you harm. So obviously you feel hatred for that person or dislike, deep dislike. That is reasonable because the basis is there, the foundation is there. He caused you harm. He caused you harm without any reason. Therefore you dislike that person. So this is very reasonable. B is the answer. Let's look at the other two. Love at first sight for a person whom one has never met before. Unreasonable, you have never met. How is that reasonable? Anger at a person who's wearing an ugly looking hat. Why would you feel angry? What other people wear? How does it matter to you? What basis does that anger have? Therefore, the correct answer is B.